the current Israeli line, as I understand it, is that it's okay that they're building on this cemetery because Palestinians have already done that. And so, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and so that makes it okay. But I haven't actually been able to find anything in regards to what they're actually building there, what Palestinians have supposedly built there in the past. Do you know about that?
That's an excellent question. In fact, the reason why I know about this is because the paper I just gave is a longer version was being published in the journal Critical Inquiry in the U.S., and both Frank Gehry and the museum have responded to me, so I know what the response is, and I can rehearse it to you chapter and verse, all of their arguments. Their fundamental argument, if that's what it is, it's not actually that the Palestinians have built on the cemetery. It's rather their argument is that they say Muslim cemeteries can be basically desacralized and then put to other use in Muslim countries. So, for example, they say, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the dates and places and times are, but you know, they refer to some cemetery, let's say in Saudi Arabia or Yemen or something. It was desacralized and then put, you know, a university or something was built on what had been a cemetery, and therefore they say Muslim cemeteries can be desacralized. Therefore, it's okay that it happens in this case. And obviously, there's I think a major difference, even if it's true that Muslim communities can desacralize one of their own cemeteries, about which I know nothing. But even if it's true for the purposes of argument, there's I think a considerable difference between a Muslim community considering its own cemetery and saying, instead of using the land for this purpose, we're going to use it for a different purpose for our community, for ourselves as Muslims, and a Jewish institution backed by the state of Israel using a Muslim cemetery that was captured by force and transferred to the Jerusalem municipality, really in contravention of international law. They're two totally different cases and situations, and to me it's amazing that the museum wants to claim that these two things are identical cases. But I think it just goes to show that there's a sense that they are unable to grasp what it is that they're actually engaged in, which is why Rabbi Heyer can say, you know, when the project goes, when the High Court says the project can go ahead, he can say moderation and tolerance have prevailed. I think it would be a mistake to say that he's I need a polite expression for this, that he's not telling the truth. I think the issue is not truth or falsehood. The issue is that he actually sincerely believes what it is he's saying. I don't think he's making it up. He really does. He just can't understand what's wrong with the project, and that's why they come up with these kinds of facile arguments to compare a Muslim community's treatment of its own cemetery with what's happening to this cemetery in Israel at the hands of this Jewish institution backed by the Israeli state.
Najma Hajar from Sydney University. Sari, thanks very much. I was really very interested in the way you use the language and discourse analysis to explain the denial of denial and the universalization of Zionism. But we use that, or you use the English language and English discourse. I'm interested to see what kind of Hebrew and what kind of promotion for the museum in Hebrew and Yiddish and perhaps in Arabic. I don't know whether there is any in Hebrew, and so can you comment on that?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know what the answer to that question is, but what I think it raises an interesting point, which is that the museum, that is the foundation, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, is an American institution. And this is something that actually and I should also say, by the way, there are plenty of Israelis themselves who are opposed to the project for all kinds of reasons. For example, they don't all like the idea of building up people's cemeteries, and it raises hackles, and rightly so, I think. So what's interesting, it seems to me, is that what adds to the complexity of this entire project is that it's a project that's being led and directed by an American institution rather than by an Israeli one, although it's obviously in cooperation with Israeli institutions and the Israeli government and the municipality of Jerusalem and so forth. So it seems like it's even more removed from local context, in the sense that this is an American institution that's working with an American sense of what's going on the ground there. And I don't know if they even have in mind, in fact, an audience inside Israel. It seems like it's all the more self-contemplative from the perspective of the institution that's pushing the program, if you see what I mean.
I think there's no doubt we all agree that the occupation should end, and it should end yesterday. In fact, in poll after poll, 80% of Israelis agree with the same thing. Would you agree, Professor, that what is missing from your presentation tonight is the other side of the story? The fact that there have been up to half a dozen serious opportunities for peace, for a Palestinian state to be established, going back to the moment of Israel's creation 60 years ago. Consistently, they've been turned down by Palestinian leadership, and the reason they've been knocked back goes to the heart of the problem we've been discussing tonight, and that is a consistent refusal by the Palestinian leadership to accept Israel's existence, because saying yes to a state of Palestine means saying yes to a state of Israel. And one only has to Google the Hamas Charter to find proof of that, where it spells out very clearly, Israel will exist and will only exist until Islam will obliterate it.
I think it's quite. Are you going away, or are you going to listen to my response? Okay. I think it's quite remarkable that after all I've just said, you asked me no question about what I actually talked about, but rather something that's in fact irrelevant to the purposes of what I've been talking about today. So I'd like to know why you don't want to talk about what I've been talking about, rather than you want to talk about something else. I can't obviously give a whole now extra hour and a half. I don't want to try people's patience. I mean, I could if you wanted me to, but I'm not going to give an hour and a half lecture to explain the history of the so-called peace process and so on and so forth. What it comes down to fundamentally is that there has been no serious attempt to enable on the part of Israel the creation of a Palestinian state. The most obvious single piece of evidence one needs to think about in that regard is that Israeli colonization of the occupied territories has not stopped for one moment since it began in 1967. So if, as you claim, the Israelis are so interested in creating a Palestinian state, and they've done so much to facilitate the creation of a Palestinian state, and it's those naughty, irresponsible Palestinians who keep saying no, 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 then why is it that the Israelis keep building and building and building in the territory that, on your account, should be turned over into a Palestinian state? I mean, how could the Israelis both want to create a Palestinian state and yet build on the very land where the state is supposedly supposed to be built? And I just think I mean, you have to kind of, square the circle you're talking about. Try and ask yourself that. I have my own answer to the question. Ask yourself, how could it be that Israel could keep saying it wants peace and it wants peace and it wants peace, and yet physically it's making literally sort of infrastructurally, it's making the prospect of peace utterly impossible. I mean, I'll just cite one last thing to stop this conversation for now. The UN issued a report in 2007 that showed that almost 40% of the West Bank is now taken up by infrastructure that's off limits to Palestinians. It's only for Jews in the West Bank. So what that means is that basically half of the West Bank is gone, and the 60% that remains is broken up into little islands that look like an archipelago rather than one continuous piece of territory. So it seems to me you have to ask yourself, why is it that if the Israelis have been so desperate to make peace, they've kept on colonizing the very land where a Palestinian state ought to have been, in this story, created? And since they've gone on doing that, and since the colonies grow every single day, the population of those colonies is growing at a rate 3 times greater than that of Israel itself. You have to ask yourself, surely this can't really be about a willingness on the part of Israel to make possible the creation of a Palestinian state. There must be something else at stake. And then put that together with what I just spent an hour talking about, and perhaps you'll come up with an answer to your own question.
Hi. Just because it's relevant to the issue of speaking about tolerance and ignoring the Palestinians, I just thought I'd mention and phrase as a question that, as you know, Benny Morris in his famous Haaretz interview said that the Palestinians had been expelled, and the problem was that they weren't all expelled, and the Palestinians were barbarians, and that a cage had to be built for them. And in a parallel to the Museum of Tolerance, the head of the leading Jewish body in New South Wales, the state we're in, introduced Mr. Morris by giving, the head of it gave a long talk about his struggle against anti-Semitism and racism, without mentioning that the person they introduced thought the Palestinians were barbarians. And as it happens, the person who gave him such a warm introduction was Mr. Aladef, who apparently opposes the occupation. And the other leading Zionist lobby is AJAC, which has come out in favour of the expulsion of the Palestinians in 1948, saying that they underestimate them, but say it's perfectly understandable, and things like that.